It was a late October evening when the idea to explore the old Wilkins house first came up. Everyone in town had their stories about that place, rumors that no one could confirm. Some said it had been abandoned for over 50 years, a decrepit relic swallowed by nature, standing at the end of Hollow Creek Road. The moment I first saw it, I understood why people avoided it. The structure leaned slightly to the left, as if trying to shrug off the years it had endured. Windows, some shattered and others smeared with layers of dirt, gave off the faintest glint when the pale autumn sun struck them. The paint on the wooden walls had mostly peeled away, revealing raw, gray timber beneath, with vines crawling up like veins. Even the massive oak trees surrounding the property seemed cautious, their bare branches swaying as if whispering warnings. Walking toward the house, my footsteps crunched against dry leaves, the only sound in the eerily quiet neighborhood. The air was thick, not with fog yet, but with the kind of silence that seemed to hold a memory of every scream, every laughter, every whisper that the house had ever witnessed. The gate had rusted shut long ago, its hinges frozen mid-swing. I had to push against it with all my strength before it finally groaned open. Immediately, I was hit with that musty, almost metallic smell that old abandoned houses carry, the scent of decayed wood, mold, and the faint, lingering aroma of what used to be furniture polished. I hesitated for a moment at the doorstep. A large wooden door, cracked and splintered in multiple places, blocked the entrance. I reached out, running my hand along its surface. The wood felt strangely warm under my fingers, as though it had absorbed the memories of those who had touched it decades ago. I paused, listening. The wind had picked up slightly, making the branches rattle against each other. And somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, startling me. When I finally pushed the door open, it let out a sound that echoed through the empty halls like a groan. Dust swirled in the thin shafts of light coming through the cracks, creating visible currents of air that seemed almost alive. The first thing I noticed inside was the grand staircase directly in front of me. Its once polished wooden steps were now warped and creaking under the slightest touch. Cobwebs draped like tattered curtains along the banisters, some thick enough to catch in my hair as I tentatively climbed. The hallway smelled even worse than the entryway, damp, cold, with hints of something sour, like old fabric left to rot. The walls, which had likely been painted a bright cream, were now yellowed and flaking. Old family portraits hung crookedly, the faces blurred by water damage and time. But you could still make out expressions, smiles frozen in mid-laughter, eyes staring straight at whoever entered, as if watching, judging. Every step I took seemed to awaken the house. Floorboards groaned underfoot. Small bits of plaster crumbled from the ceilings, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed from some unseen corner. I explored the main floor first. The living room was enormous, with a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been touched since the last person left. Ash and soot had hardened over decades, forming a crust that crackled when I kicked at it lightly. The furniture, if you could still call it that, was rotting. Couches sagged in unnatural angles. Cushions split open to reveal yellowed stuffing. A large, ornate rug covered most of the floor, but holes and stains marred its surface. On a small side table, a cracked lamp stood like a sentinel, its cord frayed, socket empty. I ran my fingers across the table's surface, and a cloud of dust puffed into the air. As I moved further, the house seemed to respond. A draft suddenly swept through the room, slamming the front door behind me with a bang that rattled the windows. I froze, heart pounding, telling myself it was just the wind. Yet, something in the air had changed, heavier, more pressing. Like the house was suddenly aware I was no longer outside, a stranger intruding in its solitude. The dining room was next. A long table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs that had somehow maintained their form despite decades of neglect. Dust covered every surface, yet faint rings suggested that meals had once been served here. Conversations had been had, and laughter had bounced off these very walls. On the far side of the room, a large sideboard still held glassware, though most of it was shattered. Something about the way the shards reflected the dim light made me catch my reflection over and over, distorted and fragmented, until I shivered. I moved into the kitchen cautiously. It was smaller, yet it felt colder. The tile floor was cracked, and the sink was filled with stagnant water that reflected the broken ceiling above. The cabinets were half open, doors hanging at odd angles. Inside, I found remnants of dishes, bowls, and jars covered in thick layers of dust and mold. One jar had an odd, crusted residue around its rim, the remnants of something that had long since decayed. Yet, it retained a sickly sweetness that I could almost smell from across the room. Then, something unexpected happened. A soft creaking sound came from above, as if someone or something was moving on the second floor. My first instinct was to ignore it, to tell myself it was just the old building settling. But the sound was deliberate. Footsteps, slow and measured. My stomach tightened. I considered leaving, but some compulsion kept me rooted to the spot. Curiosity mingled with an unspoken fear. Slowly, I turned toward the staircase. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls, and a chill ran down my spine. I began my ascent carefully, each step groaning under my weight. The upstairs landing opened into a long corridor with several doors, most hanging off their hinges. The wallpaper had long since peeled, revealing cracked plaster beneath, and the faint outline of a pattern, perhaps floral, was just barely visible. The air smelled of decay and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. Though I knew there was none, I chose a door at random, opening it slowly. Inside was a bedroom. Moonlight filtered through a shattered window, casting broken patterns on the floor. The bed frame was warped, mattress long gone, and in the corner, a dresser stood with drawers partially pulled open. I heard a faint whisper, or maybe a sigh. I froze, straining to listen. The whispering didn't repeat, yet the sense of being observed intensified. Turning to leave, I noticed the mirror on the dresser. Its glass was cloudy, but something within caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, but then I realized the reflection didn't quite match my movements. I raised my hand, and the reflection lagged, twisting in ways that felt unnatural. A cold sweat broke across my forehead, and I stepped back. The whisper returned, just a faint exhale, as if the house itself was breathing. I moved to the next room down the hall. It was smaller, maybe once a child's room. Toys, long decayed, were scattered across the floor. A small wooden horse stood upright, though it looked gnawed by time. A doll's head, eyes missing, lay in the corner. Something about the room's atmosphere was heavier, denser. as if the innocence that once filled it had been replaced by something else entirely. Then, the door slammed shut behind me with a violent force. My heart jumped. I rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. A sound of scratching began, faint at first, coming from inside the room. I pressed my back against the door, breathing heavily. The sound grew louder, rhythmic, deliberate. Something moved in the shadows. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath became visible. Panic rose, but I fought to stay calm. Slowly, I looked toward the corner where the scratching originated. There was nothing, yet I felt eyes on me, unblinking, patient. Suddenly, a small object rolled across the floorboard, smooth and worn, coming to a stop at my feet. I didn't remember moving it. The whispering returned, louder this time, incoherent, but insistent. I backed up, sliding my hand along the wall until I found a window. The glass was cracked, but I could fit through. I squeezed out, landing on the roof of the porch below, and took a moment to catch my breath. From below, the house looked calm, almost innocent, as if it had simply allowed me to exit. But the sensation lingered, a prickling awareness that I was not alone. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every sound amplified. Even though I was outside again, the house exhaled a sigh, or maybe it was me imagining it. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. I realized then, as the night deepened and the wind carried strange, hollow sounds from the nearby woods, that the Wilkins house was not just abandoned. It remembered. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow was proof that the house had a consciousness, and it had noticed me. Somehow, somewhere inside, something had been waiting for a visitor, and now it knew I was here. The night was just beginning. The wind had picked up outside, rustling the skeletal branches of the surrounding trees, and the sky had darkened further, clouds rolling in like an advancing army. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me, the sensation of the house's unseen eyes following every move I made. It was a strange, almost suffocating pressure, as if the walls themselves were breathing, shrinking the space around me. With a hesitant step, I moved back toward the porch, hoping to regain some sense of normalcy. I paused and glanced up at the second-floor windows. One of them, the one closest to the corner, was slightly ajar, though I could have sworn I had shut it when I escaped. The faintest light flickered within, not from a bulb, but almost like a reflection, a glimmer of something metallic moving inside. My rational mind insisted it was nothing, just the moon catching on a piece of broken glass or some leftover object from decades past. Yet, my gut told me otherwise. Curiosity, or perhaps an unwise streak of bravery, compelled me to go back inside. The front door had swung shut again after I landed on the porch roof. With a cautious push, it opened, groaning as though protesting my re-entry. The air was colder now, denser, almost tangible. It carried a faint, coppery scent, iron, blood perhaps, or merely the decay of something long dead. My flashlight flickered on, cutting a narrow path of light through the oppressive darkness. Dust motes swirled in the beam, dancing like tiny specters that seemed to float on currents of their own. I returned to the main hallway, the sound of my own breathing and footsteps unnervingly loud. Shadows seemed to shift, stretching along the walls in unnatural ways. The grand staircase loomed ahead, more menacing now than before. Each step promising more than just a creak, promising discovery or perhaps confrontation. With hesitant resolve, I climbed again, the old wood groaning beneath me like a warning. At the top of the stairs, I noticed a door I hadn't examined before. It was narrower, almost hidden in the corner, with a brass handle tarnished to dark green. The door seemed to hum faintly, a vibration almost imperceptible, but insistent. I ran my fingers along the surface, and a shiver shot down my spine. Something compelled me to open it, to see what lay beyond. Inside, the room was small and cramped, more like a study or a servant's quarters from decades past. A desk sat against one wall, littered with papers yellowed with age, some partially decayed and stuck together. Odd symbols, drawn in pencil or ink, were scrawled across the page's loops, spirals, almost hieroglyphic in their strangeness. I couldn't decipher them, but they felt heavy, charged, as though they carried meaning beyond words. As I rifled through the papers, I heard the soft creak of the floor behind me. I froze, flashlight shaking in my hands. I had checked the room thoroughly when I entered. There was no one else. Yet, the sound continued, deliberate, slow, pacing. I turned, shining the light down the hallway, but nothing moved. The shadows seemed deeper now, darker, almost viscous, clinging to the corners as if they had mass. A sudden cold breeze swept the room, extinguishing the candle I hadn't noticed was burning on the desk. Darkness enveloped me, the beam of my flashlight shaking wildly. Then I heard it, a whisper, unmistakably human, low and rasping, coming from somewhere behind the walls. "Go! Leave," it said, dragging the words out, almost pleading, almost warning. My pulse spiked. My fingers gripped the flashlight tighter, knuckles white. Yet I felt frozen. The voice repeated, closer this time, echoing strangely as if bouncing from one side of the room to the other. I turned back to the desk and noticed something I hadn't before. The papers were shifting, not fluttering from air, but moving deliberately, sliding across the surface in a small, precise pattern. One of the sheets flipped over, revealing a drawing, a crude depiction of the house itself. Little figures stood in the windows, some facing inward, some outward. At the base of the drawing, scribbled in the same strange script, was a single word: watching. A noise from the floor below drew my attention, something heavy, dragging along the wooden planks. My breath hitched. I had been on the second floor alone. No one should have been moving below. The sound stopped, then returned. But this time it was closer, accompanied by a faint, wet dragging sound. Panic set in, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the door across the hall. Its surface began to ripple, as though made of water rather than wood. A faint red light seeped through the edges. I realized instinctively that whatever was inside that door did not want me to enter. And yet, something inside me demanded that I do. I stepped toward it, each footfall tentative. The air grew heavier with each step, as if gravity itself had increased, pressing down on my chest. Reaching out, my fingers touched the handle and a sudden, violent slam came from the hallway behind me, rattling the walls and making the papers on the desk leap into the air. My flashlight flickered, then died. I was plunged into near total darkness, save for the faint red glow emanating from the door. A shadow moved across the doorway, a shape humanoid, but distorted, elongated in impossible ways. I couldn't make out features, yet I felt a gaze, intense and penetrating, like a blade of cold steel cutting through the darkness directly into my mind. The whispering returned, this time multiple voices overlapping, chanting, crying, laughing all at once. I stumbled back, heart hammering, tripping over the rug that had once covered the floor, but was now torn and threadbare. Something slammed against my shoulder. I spun around, flashlight finally flickering back to life, and for a fraction of a second, I saw a figure crouched in the corner, movements jerky and unnatural. It wasn't human, not entirely. Limbs bent at angles that shouldn't exist. And its eyes, oh, the eyes glowed faintly, an unnatural amber that burned into my vision. I stumbled backward, barely catching myself against the wall. A door at the far end of the hallway burst open violently, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Yet the air carried the same metallic scent, stronger now, almost suffocating. My instinct screamed at me to run, to leave immediately. But the second I turned to flee, the floorboards beneath me creaked loudly, and I realized they were no longer wood. They felt soft, almost alive, like stepping on thick, damp moss. Yet they resisted my weight. I moved quickly, every muscle taut, toward the stairs leading back down. The shadows seemed to thicken with each step I took, stretching toward me, fingers of darkness reaching for my ankles. The house was alive. It was aware. Every step I took, every breath I drew, every sound I made, it registered, and it did not want me to leave, at least, not yet. As I descended, the whispering followed me, now in an incoherent chorus, filling every corner, bouncing off the walls in maddening waves. The temperature dropped further, so cold my breath came out in visible puffs. I reached the landing to the main floor, hoping the familiarity of the living room would calm me. But it had changed. The furniture had shifted. Couches were now stacked in impossible angles. The rug rolled partially up against the wall, and the fireplace seemed to gape at me like an open mouth. From somewhere in the distance, a loud bang reverberated through the house, followed by a hollow, echoing laugh. My stomach churned. This was no longer exploration. This was survival. Whatever force had been dormant, waiting in the shadows of the Wilkins house, had awakened, and it knew my presence. The living room seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in ways that defied logic. Dust swirled violently around me as if caught in an invisible storm, and the floorboards beneath me groaned and shifted unpredictably. My flashlight flickered again, briefly illuminating the room, and for a moment, I thought I saw dozens of shadowy figures standing silently among the furniture. They didn't move, but the sensation of being watched intensified, pressing against my chest with every heartbeat. I stumbled toward the front door, desperate to escape, but the handle was ice cold under my fingers. It wouldn't budge. The house seemed to push back, each push of the door meeting an unyielding resistance, as if it had fused itself to the frame. My breath quickened, visible puffs escaping into the frigid air, mixing with the smell of decay and iron that clung to everything. A loud crash came from upstairs. I froze, listening. It sounded like furniture being thrown across a room. A sharp, hollow laughter echoed down the staircase, hollow and childlike, yet warped, unnatural. It sent a shiver racing down my spine. The whispers returned, layering themselves over each other like 1,000 voices trapped in one space. Incoherent yet insistent. Leave. Stay. Watch. See. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to orient myself, but every shadow seemed to pulse. As if alive, I decided to take the hallway toward the kitchen, hoping I could find another exit. The air grew heavier with each step. The faint metallic scent intensified, mingling with a stench I couldn't identify, something organic, rotten, almost like flesh left to decompose for decades. My hand trailed along the wall, feeling the peeling wallpaper, and I noticed that in the flickering light, the patterns seemed to shift. The floral designs twisted into shapes resembling eyes, hundreds of them, blinking slowly as if tracking my every move. The kitchen was worse than I remembered. The broken sink dripped, each drop resonating like a small, deliberate heartbeat. Cabinets hung open, their contents strewn about as if moved in a hurry. I stepped carefully over a pile of broken glass and debris, my flashlight illuminating remnants of old dishes, tarnished cutlery, and jars that had long since lost their contents. One jar tipped over on the counter, rolling slowly toward the edge, then stopping abruptly as if guided by an unseen hand. A sudden movement caught the corner of my eye. Something darted across the floor fast, low, almost serpentine. My pulse spiked. I swung the flashlight toward it, but saw nothing. The beam revealed only the remnants of decay. A torn dish towel, a rusted pan, a cracked tile. Yet, the feeling of being followed was undeniable. Every shadow seemed to twitch, keeping pace with me, lingering just beyond the reach of my light. I backed away toward the door leading to the pantry. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, shelves sagged under the weight of empty jars and rotting boxes. The room smelled overwhelmingly of mold. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. Darkness enveloped me. The whispering resumed, louder, now circling my ears, filling the small space with an almost suffocating presence. I could hear the scraping of nails or something that sounded like nails, running along the wooden shelves. My heart hammered in my chest, and I pressed my back to the wall, trying to remain calm. Then, I felt a presence directly behind me. Something cold brushed against my neck, and I flinched violently, spinning around. The flashlight beam fell on nothing, yet the air vibrated with an intensity that made my skin crawl. A small, soft giggle echoed, close to my ear, yet no one was there. The temperature dropped so sharply that my breath condensed instantly, fogging the air in front of me. I fumbled with the pantry door, finally wrenching it open and stumbling into the hallway. The house was alive in a way I had never imagined. Every room I passed was distorted, slightly different from the last time I had seen it. Shadows moved independently of their sources. Furniture shifted subtly, as if the house was rearranging itself, keeping me off balance. Desperate for escape, I rushed toward the staircase again. As I climbed, the whispers became a chorus, almost chanting, "You are here. You are seen. You belong." My pulse raced, and panic threatened to overtake reason. The wooden steps groaned underfoot, threatening to give way at any moment. Reaching the second floor, I found the hallway empty, or at least it seemed empty. Then, from one of the rooms, a door creaked open slowly, revealing a sliver of light. The faint illumination flickered, revealing a small, childlike figure standing motionless inside. Its features were blurred, obscured by shadow, yet I could feel its gaze locked on me. A low, distorted whisper came from it. "Stay, forever." I wanted to run, to scream, yet my legs felt rooted to the floor. The hallway stretched unnaturally, the walls bending slightly, elongating as if the house itself was breathing around me. I forced myself to move past the room, each step an effort against the invisible weight pressing down on me. The air seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the attic, a sound like heavy furniture being thrown. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and the house groaned, as if irritated by my continued presence. I had no choice. I needed to get out before it fully awakened, fully realized that I was intruding. I made a dash for the staircase, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the shifting shadows, focusing only on the exit. But as I reached the top, the stairs themselves seemed to stretch impossibly before me, each step longer than it should have been. Panic surged. I stumbled, almost falling, but managed to regain my balance. From somewhere deep within the house, a door slammed violently, followed by a hollow, echoing laugh that rattled the walls and reverberated in my skull. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a cacophony of voices that made it impossible to discern reality from imagination. I could feel the presence behind me again, persistent and unrelenting, brushing against my shoulders, trailing my every movement. I finally reached the landing to the main floor. The front door was still frozen shut, unyielding against my desperate push. It was then I realized the house wasn't just a structure. It was sentient. Every sound, every shadow, every creak and groan was purposeful. It wanted something from me, and I had no idea what. I sank to the floor near the frozen front door, my back pressed against the splintered wood, trying to gather my thoughts. The house seemed to exhale around me, a subtle vibration that ran through the floorboards and walls. Shadows flickered, twisting along the walls in ways that no ordinary light should have allowed. My flashlight trembled in my hands, and every flicker seemed to reveal a new figure lurking just beyond the reach of the beam. Then, the floor beneath me shifted, not a creak or groan, but a deliberate movement. Like the house itself had decided I needed to be reminded of its presence. The wooden planks warped slightly, pressing against my spine, holding me in place. I tried to push off, but the floor had an almost adhesive quality, gripping me in place with cold insistence. Panic flared in my chest. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. A sudden sound drew my attention to the staircase. The upstairs hallway door slammed open. With an ear-splitting crash, dust and debris showered down as if some force had struck the wall. I scrambled backward, nearly toppling over the remnants of old furniture scattered across the hallway. Then came the whispers, this time, distinct, clear, and almost mockingly articulate. "You shouldn't have come. You should have stayed away." My pulse spiked. I realized that leaving through the front door wasn't an option. The house didn't intend to let me go. I had to find another way out. My eyes scanned the room. The living room's windows were mostly shattered, but some remained intact, streaked with grime and age. One of the side windows, small, narrow, almost like an old servant's window looked like it could be pried open. I crawled toward it, dragging myself across the warped floorboards. Each movement made the house groan, an almost audible growl rising from the floor beneath me. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, long, thin fingers that brushed the edges of my arms and legs. I shivered violently as they retreated, and then advanced again, keeping pace with my frantic movements. Reaching the window, I tried to push it open. It resisted, stuck fast from decades of rust and rot. My hand slipped across the damp, cold wood. Then, from behind me, a soft scraping noise began. I froze. The sound was deliberate, methodical clawing along the floorboards, moving closer. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. Suddenly, something darted past the hallway behind me, a dark, elongated shadow, moving faster than any human could. I could feel its gaze, hot and piercing, searing into the back of my head. The whispers escalated into frantic, overlapping cries. "Don't leave. Stay forever." I ignored them, focusing on the window. With a surge of strength, I forced it open. A gust of cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves from outside. Relief washed over me, brief and fleeting. I scrambled through the narrow opening, scraping my arms against the rough frame. Outside, the yard was cloaked in darkness, the skeletal trees casting long, twisting shadows that seemed alive. The ground outside was uneven, littered with fallen branches and debris from the old house. I ran instinctively, not daring to look back. Every step I took, the house seemed to pulse. A heartbeat felt through the soles of my feet, through the chill wind that now pressed against my face. Behind me, faint whispers lingered, echoing through the night, fading slowly, but not entirely. As I neared the edge of the property, the sensation of being watched intensified. The house loomed above me, windows dark and empty. Yet I could swear I saw faint silhouettes in the panes, figures frozen in motion, staring. The air seemed to hum, a low vibration that resonated through my chest. The ground beneath my feet trembled slightly, as if the house itself was unsettled by my attempt to leave. I finally reached the street, gasping, my heart hammering. The normal sounds of the night returned, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, but the Wilkins house remained in my peripheral vision, a looming silhouette of decay and menace. I didn't stop running until the street lights of the next block bathed me in familiar light. Only then did the trembling subside, and the whispers faded into distant echoes carried on the wind. Even as I made my way home, I could feel it, the house's gaze following me, lingering, patient. Every creak in my own apartment, every shadow that shifted in my peripheral vision, reminded me of that night. The Wilkins house hadn't finished with me. I knew, deep down, it never would, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized the horrifying truth. The house didn't just trap you inside its walls. It trapped your memory, your fear, your presence, feeding on it, waiting for the next time it could draw someone close enough to notice. The night passed, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow in my room seemed to twitch. Every sound was amplified, reminding me of the whispers, the scraping, the cold, deliberate presence. I kept thinking of the attic, the rooms upstairs, the small, childlike figure with the amber eyes. It wasn't just a memory, it was a warning, a promise. a lingering fragment of the house's awareness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had followed me invisibly, silently, into the night. 5 days passed after that night, but the memory of the Wilkins house refused to fade. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, haunted by whispers, shifting shadows, and the amber eyes of the childlike figure. Even in sunlight, ordinary places felt slightly distorted, as if the house had left its imprint on my perception. Every corner of my apartment seemed to whisper, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of what I had escaped, and what I hadn't. Curiosity battled fear. I couldn't stop thinking about the symbols, the shifting walls, and the deliberate movements of furniture as if the house was alive. Something about it had wanted attention or perhaps a witness. Every memory of that night replayed itself vividly, the whispers circling my ears, the floorboards shifting beneath me, the small, narrow window through which I had escaped. It all felt like part of some elaborate test. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it had been the result of an overactive imagination, fatigue, and the eerie atmosphere. But deep down, I knew better. The Wilkins house didn't just sit empty. It observed, remembered, and somehow interacted with anyone who dared enter. It left traces, echoes of its presence, and those echoes followed me relentlessly. A week later, I returned to the edge of Hollow Creek Road, but only to glance at the house from a safe distance. The setting sun cast long shadows across its decayed walls, the broken windows reflecting the fading light. It seemed quieter now, dormant, almost peaceful. Yet I could feel its gaze, patient and knowing, watching me even from afar. I left again, heart racing, but with an odd sense of closure. I realized that some places are meant to remain unexplored, their secrets preserved by darkness, decay, and time. The Wilkins house had claimed a piece of my mind that night, a fragment I could never recover. But it had not claimed my body. That, at least, was a small mercy. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear the soft whisper of a child, or the scrape of something moving just out of sight. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees on Hollow Creek Road, I can almost make out faint laughter carried from the direction of the Wilkins house, reminding me that some places never truly let go. The house waits, always, and those who enter, even if they escape, carry a piece of its memory, a whisper in the darkness that never fully fades. The night may pass, the shadows may recede, but the Wilkins house, it endures.